Well, good evening and welcome to our live stream from the Grace Chapel studio here in Sherman, Texas on this Saturday evening, November 20th. Moving rapidly towards the holiday season. This is our final message in our series. We wrap it up tonight entitled The Trail of Thanks. And then next weekend, we begin our Advent messages, the Advent season, 4 Sundays prior to Christmas. So again, we are glad that you're with us tonight. Hope that you'll have a great Thanksgiving holiday and then be back that week from now. And we'll be having our start of our Advent season. As the imprints left in the ground by the countless number of heavily loaded wagons crossing through this area is truly an amazing sight. That impressive scene has been the catalyst for our 3-week series leading us into Thanksgiving. And again, before I forget to officially do this, happy Thanksgiving to you all. But this series stems from this graphic and is based on Paul's words to the church in Thessalonica. And if you have your message guide, you'll see that printed at the top. But it says, no matter what happens, always be thankful, for this is God's will for you who belong to Christ Jesus. And as I memorized this verse, that phrase that we focus on, always be thankful, I memorize it as give thanks in all circumstances. Granted, some days are easier than others to have thank shouldn't be based on our circumstances or how we're feeling on that particular day, or merely giving thanks when things work out the way we wanted them to. As we learned thus far, people often express their gratitude toward God in hindsight, which is always 2020. We understand that. There are certainly those faith-stretching and crisis-challenging moments where you find yourself in the midst of a difficult time, but when perhaps you pause and your heart offers up thanks and praise to God for his insight during those times. But the one thanks God's people often neglect to consider is giving thanks for God's foresight or pursuit. As the psalmist wrote in Psalm 39, verse 4, please soon be gone, or when will this be over, or when will I hear from you? The same is true no matter what our question is. Please, Lord, show me my future. There is that, again, interest or pursuit to know what lies ahead. Some who are lacking in faith or trust in God are paralyzed by what they know they don't know. You may have to read that again, but I'll say it another time. Those folks lacking in faith are paralyzed by what they know they don't know. Reality is when you can plan and prepare and even pursue the path you perceive to be laid out before you, but it's not perfect because you don't know with absolute certainty what lies ahead in the tomorrows. But God does. And so God speaks, and the prophet Isaiah records, you have more than enough advisors, astrologers, and stargazers, but let them stand up and save you from what the future holds. But they are as useless as dried grass burning in a fire. They cannot even save themselves. You will get no help from them at all. Their hearth is not a place to sit for warmth. Now, if you haven't grown up or been a part of a house that actually used a wood burning fireplace for a heat source. You may not quite understand what is being said here, but the hearth is a place where Sharon, for example, when we would start a fire in the winter, she loved to sit, and because of the warmth that she derived. And so what they're saying here is that you have all of these earthly people who think that they can tell you what the future holds, but they're of no help at all. They can't even save themselves, and their advice or their insights or whatever they're telling you is going to provide you no true insight or help. So we find for many years that I've at least during the between Thanksgiving and Christmas, have found that it was a good time for me to slow things down and reflect on the previous months. It served as a time of self-evaluation and examination regarding my spiritual growth and effectiveness. With this, I usually would find a passage or a verse along with a theme to keep in mind on a daily basis throughout the coming year. And so that perpetual process played out, spending time November through December reflecting back, self-examining, kind of determining where I've grown and how I've grown, where I still need to apply myself toward in the spiritual disciplines, but then gleaning a sense of where God would want me to place my focus on growing in the months ahead, in the year ahead. Well, through that one year, God spoke to my heart, and the predominant thought for that coming year was do today. Don't be crippled by the past. Don't be concerned about what's ahead. Focus on doing today. And as a result, I found myself developing this practice of thanking God for getting me through yesterday, being with me today, and especially to thank Him for the promise of His care and guidance and protection for me in whatever lies ahead. Why thank God for tomorrow? Well, God is the only one who knows and holds the future. Again, in Isaiah, here in chapter 41, can your idols make such claims as these? Let them come and show what they can do, says God, the King of Israel. Let them try to tell us what occurred in years gone by or what the future holds. And so I again reiterate that God is the only one who knows and holds the future. Now, granted, there are people who claim they can read the stars and tell you your future, but that's just placing a thought into your mind, which you will tend to live out because your mind is focused on it. But reality is the actual exact future of your life only God knows and holds. Therefore, when it comes to the trail of thanks, it's healthy and wise to express your thanks to God for His foresight. And how a person can go about that is what we focus on this evening. So turn in your favorite Bible or a Bible at Daniel chapter 2, verse 29 through 30. In your favorite Bible or a Bible at Daniel chapter 2, verse 29 through 30. And a moment in the life of the prophet Daniel when he and his friend get it out of his sorcerers and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. Interesting, there is not a man on earth who can do what the king asked. What the king asked is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, small g and plural, the gods, and they do not live among men. And only God, who is these so-called wise people were telling him, and ordered all the wise men of Babylon to be executed, of which Daniel and his friends were considered to be a part of, even though they had not been consulted regarding this matter. Daniel hears of this decree issued by the king and secures an audience with Nebuchadnezzar, where he requests time to interpret the dream that he had for him. Daniel is granted permission, and he begins immediately to secure prayer support for himself, and he starts in seeking God's insight regarding this issue. As we know, God answers Daniel's prayer, and with that knowledge comes before Nebuchadnezzar to share the God-provided interpretation of the dream, which brings us now to Daniel chapter 2, verse 29 and 30. Nebuchadnezzar, who was given a insight or a sense of what lied ahead in the future, but didn't understand it. So again, I want to emphasize God alone. This is a film or a movie, knows how all the choices of mankind will unfold in the future. I, for one, am glad that God doesn't reveal the whole picture to me. In my head, I think God reveals what lies before me, literally one morsel at a time, so I can accept it, process it, digest, and obey it. When it comes to God's foresight, which he does possess, I need to be thankful. And I believe we all need to be thankful. But here are the fill in the blanks. How do I express our thank you? Know what of what lies ahead. It's just like the signal sent out across the airways. You only pick up on your radio that signal which matches the frequency you've dialed in on your announcement that breaks into the normal program. Chapter 44, there in verse 8. Don't be afraid. Don't worry. I have always told you what will happen. You are my witnesses. There is no other God but me. Don't be afraid. Don't worry. I know you don't know. You ever had that happen? Maybe when you were a kid. Whatever you know. God is working diligently on a daily basis to develop your spiritual character and to deepen your spiritual conviction in order that you can be adequately prepared. Saul, because he had indicated he would be willing to go up against Goliath as Israel's representative. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, David lays out his case as to why he should be permitted to go up against Goliath. He says, your servant, to Saul, he's saying this, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. So when a lion or bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it. I struck it and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Now watch what David says in verse 37. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. Now, David wasn't displaying a youthful zeal, rather a real soulful awareness that God had more than adequately prepared him for a time like this. That's what Mordecai says to her. You know, God's prepared you for a time such as this. In Jeremiah 29, verse 11, for I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. It's not for calamity, to give you a future and a hope. God knows the challenges that will be coming your way. Because of his love for you, he is preparing you today for tomorrow. That's why he avails himself to help you learn and grow in order to be victorious in whatever battle you are facing, whatever challenge you encounter, or whatever task that you undertake. So we're asking ourselves, well, how do I go about expressing my thanks for God's foresight? Is ahead walking? Well, he hasn't walked me through it yet, and at this point, it hasn't happened, and that's true. Often, when I'm writing someone and requesting their assistance or some kind of an action, I'll close the letter with the words, I want to thank you in advance for your consideration or cooperation or your prompt action. Whatever the correct response will be, I'm thanking them for what I'm hoping they will do. When you thank God in advance, you're thanking him for what you know God will do. Now, what do you know God's going to do? Well, he's going to walk with you. He's not going to abandon you. He's not going to leave you. The psalmist David writes in Psalm 28, verse 7, and again, we're talking about being thankful for God walking with us through what is ahead. But in Psalm 28, David says, he is, speaking of God, he is my strength. This is a definitive. This isn't a question. This is God. He is my strength. This is a definitive. This isn't a question. This isn't a possibility. It's not just a consideration. It's a definitive. He is my strength, my shield from every danger. Not just some things, not just here and there, but from every danger. I trusted in him. Now, yes, that's past tense. I trusted in him and he helped me. Well, based on what God has already done, David knows that tomorrow he's going to do the same thing. Well, what's David saying God has done? He's been my strength and my shield. So what comes of that is this: joy rises in my heart. This is David speaking, writing. He says, joy rises in my heart until I burst out in songs of praise to him. So as David indicated to Saul, God helped him in the past, and there's no reason to think God wouldn't help him out in the future. It was that way with David, and it's that way with all of God's followers. He is and will be your strength and shield. He doesn't change. He's the same today as he was yesterday and will be tomorrow. He told Moses and reassured Joshua, I will not fail you, nor will I forsake you. That's the identical promise God gives to you in your covenant relationship with him. He will not fail you. He will not forsake you. He will be with you. By definition, his name, Emmanuel, God with us. He will be with you throughout your journey of faith. I'm not sure how that impacts you, but David, the psalmist, writes that his heart was influenced to burst out in songs of praise to God. Now, if you recognize Julie Andrews, the sound of music, certainly not one of my my favorite musicals, but there is this part where she just is out in the fields and just bursts out into songs and thanksgiving and praises for what God was doing in her life. I think the realization of God's help and presence in your life readily serves as a catalyst for a person to rejoice. Now, the last verse from Colossians 4, Paul's letter to the church in Colossae gives us kind of a practical side of all of this. And he writes, continue praying, keep alert, and always thanking God. So what Paul is saying is, well, how do we go through life? What's kind of a motto? What's kind of a routine that we should slip into? And he says, continue, or to be earnest towards, to persevere, to be constantly diligent in praying. Now, is it always convenient? Well, no. Do we like to cut it short? Do we like to say little, well, thank you, God, for everything, and that suffices? Well, what Paul is advocating here is that it's an earnest, that we persevere, that we stick with it, we give adequate time and heart to praying, which is listening and sharing with God on a daily basis. Second of all, that it says here, keeping alert, but to be watchful. That's literally what it means, to keep awake, to be watchful. Why? Because there's dangers all around us. I mean, I don't think most people, if they were driving down a highway, would say, yeah, go ahead and blindfold me. I mean, you want to stay alert. I mean, we are traveling at an incredible pace in our culture, in our world today. We need to have our eyes wide open, and that's what this is referencing. Keeping alert, stay awake, look all around, be watchful. And the last thing Paul is advocating is that we would always thank God, that we would have gratitude in our hearts. And for years I've talked about to express our gratefulness to God as an act of worship. And so this, as I said, becomes an incredibly good motto for life. To be earnest in your prayers, to be watchful in your walk, and always thank God for what he has done, what he is doing, and what he will do in your life. Be sure of thank your health. Now, those who were going west had a guide. They had somebody who knew the way. But the comfort came when they saw